You're listening to Sox in the Basement, a production of the Broadcast Basement Limited, where every show is 30 minutes of good and comes from a basement bar on the south side of Chicago. Pull up a stool, pour a cold one, and join us right now for Sox in the Basement. Heard everywhere podcasts can be found, and always at soxinthebasement.com.
And belly on up to the 9-foot homemade oak bar, except with Chris not being here, I'm not bellied up to a bar. But I am still going to bring you 30 minutes of Sox in the Basement, and my name is Ed. As you may have seen if you follow Chris on Twitter, he is saying that he caught COVID. However, I think it's just a cover, and you can choose to believe what you like. Either he's sick, or he's hiding out in Jerry Reinsdorf's closet to find out what the owners plan on finally giving the players when we get back to the negotiation table. So in the meantime, though, Sox in the Basement, as always, brought to you by the fine folks at Family Waterproofing. Family Waterproofing can keep your house dry. In fact, your house shouldn't even just be doing a dry January if you're doing that. It should be dry year-round. Give them a call, 708-330-4466, and they will be more than happy to come out and take a look to make sure that your foundation's in good repair, that there's not going to be any water issues come spring, and they can do things like your window wells and gutters and things like that as well. Give them a call or visit familydry.com and tell them Sox in the Basement sent you. So, one of the beautiful things about our new partnership with Sox on 35th is that if one of us goes down, either for espionage purposes or because we can't talk because of a loathsome disease, we do get to bring in some of the guys from Sox on 35th to kind of help us out and still be able to talk White Sox with you. And of course, go to soxon35th.com for all of your White Sox content needs. There's some great articles on there every single day. There's new material. And you can, of course, listen to Sox in the Basement at soxon35th.com. Joining me today to help me out is the editor-in-chief of Sox on 35th, Jordan Lazowski. How are you, my friend?
You know, I'm doing better than Chris, apparently. No matter what it happens to be, I think it's serious enough that, you know, he's decided that I got to fill in for him for the day. So whether it's espionage or an actual sickness, it's clearly very serious for him.
Yeah, he doesn't miss shows for anything less than sitting on a beach. So, let's jump into something that Sox on 35th tweeted out last night, and that was, you guys are looking for people to tell you what your ideal all-time Sox rotation is. What parameters are you guys looking for that? Because I was thinking about it, you could have, you know, there's been some really good pitchers that have thrown not even a full season for the White Sox in the past. And then you've got, obviously your all-time, your Ring of Honor, the guys whose numbers are retired and things like that. So what for you do you look for when you're saying an all-time rotation for a team?
You know, I was trying to put together my list for this, and it's very hard. And I think fans kind of took it from the standpoint of, you know, the best players to play in that uniform, maybe regardless of how long they were in it. I took maybe a different approach to it. I took two different lists. I made two different lists. I made one of players that I've actually seen. So this is like the last 15 years. So this is not an extensive list by any means. The second one was more of a statistical measures type list. So I looked at players who had thrown at least 700 innings with the White Sox. That's about the top 50 pitchers. And just kind of did a very simple ranking system of strikeouts, ERA plus, wins, and then both baseball and fan graphs, wins above replacement. And basically said, hey, if you ranked first, you got 5 points, or second, you got 4, and so on and so forth. From there, I settled on my list as well. But that's more of a statistical list versus the ones of the players I've seen. So no real criteria for doing it. And you'll see if you look through some of those comments, a lot of the fans were just like, hey, you know, it's a combination of old and new, and some of the best names I've seen and some of the best names I've heard were amazing. So.
Well, yeah, because I was thinking about like a guy like Tom Seaver, right? And here is one of the best pitchers in MLB history, but he has, you know, the one season at the end of his career. He's not with the Sox for long at all, and gets his 400th win though. So, you know, you're sitting there saying if it's just somebody who's ever worn the uniform, I would certainly want to include a guy like that. But if you're talking about guys that really, really made a contribution to this team, then yeah, it's got to be a completely different list. So who's on your all-time, if you're saying just guys that threw the 700 innings?
So if you're looking at from more of a statistical list, I went with Ed Walsh, Brett Faber, Ted Lyons, Billy Pierce, and Eddie Seacott. And I think if you look through some of the lists that fans were putting together, I think Walsh, Lyons, and Pierce were all very common. I think just outside of those top five fell a guy like Mark Burley, even fell a guy like Chris Sale. I think we underappreciate some of the value Sale brought in terms of all-time numbers. But those five names really separated themselves from a statistical measure of saying, hey, these are guys who had pitched a lot among the top 50 all-time with the White Sox. Here's where their numbers fell.
Yeah, well, and that's, I think Burley becomes an interesting choice because is that just sort of a recency bias where we're looking at going, he was so much of a fan favorite for so long that, you want to throw him in there because he meant so much to us as fans. But yeah, somebody like Chris Sale, who's obviously got more talent than Burley does in terms of his arm talent. But then you also kind of go back and you do get guys like Jack McDowell and Wilson Alvarez, who were, really very good for the team in the 90s. And I wasn't seeing a whole lot of love for Blackjack or anybody like that. So you kind of do wonder, like, is Burley in particular is he the guy that, we just love him because we love him and not necessarily that he was really that great of a pitcher? Because I think this also gets into his Hall of Fame candidacy too, doesn't it?
It depends on, I think it's a very relevant question. I think a lot of it is partially recency bias because of his name being in the news about the Hall of Fame ballots and things like that. I don't want to discount some of what Burley's done in general for the Sox. I mean, he ranks fourth all-time in strikeouts for the team, which is something considering it's Mark Burley. Fangraph wins above replacement. He ranks fifth all-time with the White Sox. Wins, he ranks fifth all-time with the White Sox. So he has some just outside the top five. You can probably make an argument that if you put him in the top five, it's that recency bias. But at the same time, when it comes to the Hall of Fame case, it depends on your definition of a Hall of Famer. I'm someone who likes a larger Hall of Fame. I think consistency is just as important as your peak as a player. And that's why I think Burley consistently is going to sit around probably 8, 9, 10% on the ballot and not really go anywhere. But at the same time, I think that when you're talking about historical White Sox, you got to think peak and consistency. I think that consistency piece, and if you see some of what fans wrote in some of their explanations, the consistency is a big part of it for people. I think playing in the game we do today, where 200 innings is a rarity from a pitcher, for it to be something that Burley prided himself on doing almost every season is important to White Sox fans.
Yeah, and you look at, like, on Baseball Reference, you look at the similar pitchers to Burley, and you get some guys that I think would potentially break into the top five for a lot of franchises. I mean, Orel Hershiser is his fourth highest comp, and I think you could talk to a lot of Dodgers fans and they'd want to put Orel Hershiser up there because of what he did. You got Bob Welch, who was very good for a long time. Catfish Hunter is a guy that, I think a lot of his fans would sit there and say, if I'm doing an all-time rotation, I'm going to put Catfish Hunter up there. I think just the idea for Mark Burley that he went out there for 16 seasons in the majors, and really when you get to Miami and Toronto, he's still putting up 200 innings. He's still just taking the ball and going out there. He's got good numbers the entire way through. I mean, heck, his last season in 2015, 4 complete games. Who does that? I mean, really.
Right.
So I do think that there is some recency bias for it, but I really do think that Burley is one of those guys that as time goes on, like if we're having this conversation 50 years from now, first of all, I'm extremely old at that point, but I think, it is something where fans could sit there and look back at it the way we look back at say, Pierce or Lyons or something like that, and just know that there was a form of greatness that may not translate to the current game.
I think there is an element of, the narrative that you can create around Mark Burley and say, like you said, he pitched 16 seasons in the majors. 14 of them, he hit 200 innings. One of them, he was 4 outs away from 200 innings. And then the only other season is his rookie season where he only started 3 games. So that is part of the aura of Mark Burley. And I don't know if baseball is ever going to go back to the 200 inning guys. I think You might see some swing back in that direction in terms of pendulum, but you're not going to see 14 out of 16 seasons with 200 innings pitched. And I think that's sort of what's going to stay about him, especially some of the other names on this list. Walsh, Lyons, Pierce, guys who kind of stuck around on these lists. Those were some of the teams that had some sort of historic. This is not a White Sox franchise with a lot of storied history in the playoffs. These are guys you can tie back to those moments, more or less. It's not always World Series, but those are the types of players that tend to stick around because there's so few of these playoff matchups, World Series games that you hear about these same names so often. And that's why I think Burley has that chance of being, 50 years from now, I remember watching Mark Burley and, the game's not the same nowadays, such and such, get off my lawn and all that fun stuff. But I think that's part of what made Mark Burley great, and I think, if you're going to put him in your top 5, maybe it's not the strongest statistical argument for it, but the same could be said as you try and put him in the Hall of Fame, and I call him a Hall of Famer. So it's about the player as a whole, not necessarily just ERA behind it, for example.
Well, we do not have baseball right now, and we have cold weather, and we have all sorts of things going on that are not White Sox related in the real world. But what we do have is places that we can go and relax and have a wee drop of the creature, so to speak, to warm us up on these cold days. And I'm talking, of course, about Cork and Kerry in Beverly, the quintessential Irish bar experience in the south side of Chicago. 10614 Southwestern, the best Irish bar around. They've got party rooms. When it's not too cold outside, you can go and hang out on their outdoor area. Or you can just, like I said, sidle on up to the bar, have a pint, warm up a little bit, and then get back out to the grind. Or in the shadow of the ballpark, you can have some of the best food around. And that's Cork and Kerry at the Park at 33rd and Princeton. Head on out there, get your food, eat up, have a couple of drinks, be ready to roll into the game, and then maybe afterwards, before you call your rideshare, you let the traffic clear out and you have a little bit of an after-game celebration at Cork and Kerry at the Park. Again, 33rd and Princeton. Either way, you just can't lose. And, Jordan, I know you're probably looking forward to getting out to pre-gaming before a ball game or getting out to watching some spring training games with people. But we're stuck, right? We're stuck because we're still in the lockout. We're hearing now that the owners and players who have not spoken since December, the deadline, basically, for the CBA to end, they're going to start talking at the end of the month, which sounds like it's going to push the season start back and stuff. But, I'm listening to what the issues are. And I think there's a key issue here that's going to define for us where the owners' heads are really at. Because the argument for me is always the owners are worried about making as much of money as they can. They don't want to pay the players. They want to save every dime. They want to scrimp. They want to put it in their own pockets. But then owners, of course, have to sit there and say, well, no, we want to win. We're in this because we love the game and we want to build a winner. But there's a moment here where players want either a higher minimum salary. They want to match something closer to the NFL or the NBA or even the NHL because they're behind, especially the NFL. Or they want younger players to be under team control for fewer years. So for me, if the owners want to win, they want to control that young talent. If they want to save money, they want to give them the higher minimum salary but are willing to give up less control. So which way do you think the owners will go with this, if you had to guess?
I think it probably tends towards an increase in the minimum salary. I just think even if you increase that minimum, I mean, it's $500,000 now. If we say, or the ballpark of $500,000, if we get that closer to $1 million, does that break the bank? Really? Like, no, probably not. But it gives the players a little bit more earlier on in their career. I think that if you kind of play it out and draw it out, that 6th year of control, or for some players with service time manipulation, that 7th year of control really is so valuable, whether it's from an on-the-field standpoint, or from the standpoint we saw with like a Chris Bryant or a Javi Baez, where the Cubs traded them, got really good assets in return, and capitalized on that value, maybe not in the way the fans wanted, but capitalized on that value. And the same is going to go for every team. They're going to see that value probably outweighs paying the players more earlier up front. And I think that's the way the league is going to, or the owners are going to want to go. Say, hey, we'll take the upfront costs, knowing that the value is still absolutely there down the line, whether it's the guy's playing for my team or I'm trading the guy for future assets that I'll pay a league minimum salary to, and then I'll be able to control up to that 6th or 7th year. I think control is their biggest thing.
Yeah, and I tend to agree with that, because I think if they sit there and say, we're not really worried about control, we're more worried about saving money on the front end with young players, then it's sort of a backwards thing, because if they don't raise the minimum salary and they maintain a longer amount of control, or if they do raise the minimum salary and they don't maintain a longer amount of control, what they're really saying is that we'd rather pay free agents, right? We'd rather go out and try and damp down the free agent market and pay less to guys that are on the open market than we would our own players who we've invested in, developed, and all of that. So I think they want to raise that minimum, because I also do think too that what happens is you're going to be able to get guys to stick around longer who are more fringe players. And I know tanking is a huge issue for the players as well. They don't like the idea that, well, they don't like what the White Sox did, right? They don't like what Rick Hahn did, trading away his veteran players, not really signing free agents, going with young, unproven guys, and trying to build a core that way. And a lot of teams have followed that. The Cubs did it, obviously. But that, I think, if you're talking about, giving up just a little bit of control, like you said, that last year, that really valuable year, or setting it at an age instead of setting it at a service time amount, but giving guys more up front and saying, okay, you make it to the bigs, you're a millionaire. Congratulations. I don't know. I think the ownership at that point makes not only more sense for them to do that, but I think it also makes them want to, be able to show that they want to win, because they're going to be willing to hold on to their younger players. They're going to be willing to pay guys more. But I also think it's going to change that whole manipulation piece too, because if it goes up, if it escalates with service time, they're going to want to give up guys that they know they're not going to sign long term, and it's going to help the trade market, frankly. And I think it's also going to help get guys into the majors.
Along all of these lines, Jeff Passan put out an article this week on ESPN about kind of where everything stands in the lockout, and kind of put together some of the changes that the players are asking for. And he said a lot of things include earlier free agency, earlier arbitration, changes to the draft system, more money going to younger players, a higher minimum salary, less revenue sharing, these types of things. They're not going to get all of that. And I think, if you focus on kind of what we're talking about here, a minimum salary, as well as maybe changes to the draft, for example, changes to the draft will sort of naturally kind of fix some of the changes or some of the tanking issues that are prevalent in baseball. If you disincentivize, unless maybe it's just the top 5 teams, the worst 5 teams get the top 5 picks, and then from there it's reverse order or something like that, you disincentivize it at least a little bit, you move in the right direction. Minimum salary pays players more early on, you're moving in the right direction. I think from that standpoint, there are going to be things that they need to give up. And I think if you focus it on 1 or 2 key issues and really say, hey, here's the benefit of this, it's better than having this situation where, you're not playing games. The owners are going to be stubborn about this. We saw it in 2020. We're seeing it now in the fact that they're not talking until the end of the month. They're going to be stubborn. You're going to need to pick certain things that you focus on.
Yeah, and I've been a little, I don't want to say confused by the issue of tanking as much as I think it's sort of a misnomer of what the tanking issue really does, because I think what the players are trying to say is, and this seems to be agent driven more maybe than player driven, but what the players are trying to say is, Well, if you guys are out there not signing free agents and not trying to compete with veterans, then you're hurting the game and you're hurting those veteran players who then can't find jobs. But at the same time, there's also the argument to be made that, well, yeah, but these teams that are going through this process where they're not going out and saying, all right, I'm going to put Jed Lowry at second base, even though he's at the tail end of his career, and I know I don't have enough pitching, and I know I'm not going to be able to spend enough to find, a full field because some of my young guys aren't performing and things like that. Teams have to be realistic at some point. But doesn't that help young guys coming up though? Don't we get more guys that get more opportunities? I mean, aren't there guys that were playing for the White Sox that would have never seen the field otherwise?
There are. I absolutely think they are, and you can make the argument that should they have ever seen the field is another question, obviously.
In some cases, no, but
exactly. In some cases, no, and that's going to happen. But at the same time, it still gives them that opportunity. It's the conversation of those types of players who probably shouldn't play, but are going to get time. They're going to be able to talk about forever. They'll get that minimum salary for at least a little bit, versus having to just get paid the minor league salary. Is that more beneficial than signing a Jed Lowry type player to just fill a hole at second base until the next top prospect is ready? Jed Lowry type players, veteran type players have had long careers. They've had that chance to make, pretty sizable amounts of money in some cases. Is that better to give them that extra year than the young player who might never get a chance again? Is the difference in wins big enough there? It's the argument between, are the 2 or 3 wins you're going to get from replacing a veteran or having a veteran instead of a young guy who probably shouldn't be there, are those worth it compared to giving the young guys their chance to maybe catch lightning in the bottle? And from a dollar standpoint, the players or the owners are probably going to say, I'm going to go get the young guy and just see what the heck happens. But that on the free agent market will now create less competition. It's just going to drive the prices back down, which is what players don't want. When they're fighting for the Players Association, they're talking about those major league players. They're fighting for those guys, not necessarily the minor league guys. They're trying to help improve the game for the minor league guys, but they're not directly advocating for them in these conversations, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it makes perfect sense. And if you think about it, you have veteran players that are sitting on the committee. You don't have guys who are necessarily recently called up or have within the past few years that opportunity where they sat there and said, okay, if this team hadn't been tanking, hadn't been trying to win with veteran players, I wouldn't have had the opportunity to come up and prove myself. When you've had a 10-year career, you're probably looking back on it and going, well, of course I was going to make the majors. It's me, dude. Right. But when you have a guy like Max Scherzer, who's also now the highest annual value for a pitcher ever, and is, at the end of his career and has accomplished so much, he really may not be thinking about it in terms of, what happens to the next Charlie Tilson, for example, or, somebody that, got a shot, didn't do anything with it, and is back out of the picture, versus somebody like himself who's sitting there saying, yeah, you know what, I'm more concerned about what happens to Clayton Kershaw's, not this contract when he's 32, but the next one when he's 35 or 36, or maybe this contract if somebody gives him 8 years. He's thinking more along those lines. I completely agree with you on that one.
I mean, don't get me wrong. It's an important thing because the veterans help keep the owners honest. To be honest with you, it makes sure that the proper amount of revenue is going to go to players. But at the same time, again, when you have a more veteran voice as your leadership and guys leading the MLBPA, both on the player side and some guys like Tony Clark who have had baseball careers, you're getting to the standpoint of you're protecting the veterans, and hopefully that kind of helps the minor league players once they get to that point. But it really doesn't do anything for them early on. So it's trying to find that balance. It's important that I don't think necessarily gets there, but at the same time, the veterans got to keep the owners honest, and that's what should keep things moving.
Well, hopefully they will get there, and hopefully we will not have too much of a delay to the season. But if you are hungry for White Sox content, of course, again, Sox on 35th, Sox in the Basement, you can come here. And if you want to make an easy $1,000 in the meantime, thanks to our friends Butch Zemar at Elite Benefits of America, where you yourself can go as a small business and get your employees taken care of with all sorts of great benefits, health insurance, things like that. Butch will take care of you and your business, but he will also take care of giving $1,000 to the person who brings us the best guest in the Sox in the Basement guest bounty. And thus far, we've had David Sampson. Thus far, we've had Liam Hendricks. So the bar has been set pretty high between a former Major League executive and the current closer of the White Sox. But if you got somebody, if you want to harass somebody online, that's how David Sampson came to us. If you've got a personal friend, if a former player's number happens to be in your cell phone, hey, give them a call, give them a try. You don't know if you're going to be the one that wins the $1,000. If we haven't had him on before, we'll get him on the show. We'll work on it. We've got a few in the hopper that we're working on setting up right now. We'll have a fan vote. It's not going to be up to us. So you can even try and stuff the ballot box because we live in Chicago and that's the way. So in the meantime, bring us a guest, give Butch Zemar and Elite Benefits of America a call at 888-535-3006 or go to elitebenefits.net. With Sox on 35th, Jordan, what's coming up for you guys that people should look forward to, as this show's coming out in the next couple days?
Well, first of all, I want to know what the bounty is for when I eventually bring Chris back from whatever mission he's on. Hopefully we can find him.
Well, I don't know. We'll scrap something together. I don't know if Butch wants Chris back. I assume he does, but I don't think he's going to pay that much for him.
It's probably better than zero. But so over on Sox on 35th, what we're hoping to have out probably by the time this episode airs, it's technically been 5 seasons since U.S. Cellular Field became guaranteed rate field. So what one of our writers, Tim Moran, went back and did and said, hey, what are some of the top 5 games, top 5 moments from the quote-unquote guaranteed rate field era? Just something fun to look back on at a time in baseball when maybe it isn't so much fun with the lockout and not much information there. Just taking a little trip down memory lane, kind of what we did with the Sox starting pitchers. Take a little trip down memory lane, have a little fun, and I do want to shout out Javier Vazquez, though. When I put together my list for those starting pitchers, I didn't realize he had 3 straight, almost 5-win seasons in terms of Fangraph wins above placement for the White Sox. I did not realize he was that solid. He made my top 5 list for like the past 15 years or so. But as we're taking those trips down memory lane, it's always fun to find those types of guys who feels like kind of got underrated or under the radar a little bit for that era.
Yeah, well, and that's funny you bring up Javier Vazquez because, you think about memories and you think about stuff that's happened and maybe not in the best era of White Sox baseball either since they became guaranteed rate field. But even before that, going back to Javier Vazquez, what does everybody remember? They remember his failure against the Rays in the 2008 playoffs, right? That's the lasting memory of him. And so, yeah, that's a curious thing, though, because if you think about it, so the past 5 years, you have a year that's lost to the pandemic. We weren't allowed in the ballpark in 2020. You have, some of the leanest years of White Sox baseball in terms of having guys up that, weren't necessarily a long-term part of the team like we were talking about, or having some really rough seasons as far as how people performed. So on our way out, though, so what is your favorite guaranteed rate field moment?
It's going to be an unfair recency bias, and it's the Rodon no-hitter, and it's because I was there. I don't think it's something I would have ever gotten or thought I would have gotten to experience in person. The Burley no-hitter and perfect game, I had friends and family members in attendance who, just decided to randomly go and got to experience, history. I never thought I'd get there, so to kind of just go on an unsuspecting weekday night and watch a no-hitter, that's something that's going to be probably my top memory for quite some time, even if it is a little unfair. But
no, and I think that's a good one, and I think you're going to get a lot from 2021. As far as people's favorite memories, because how could you not, right? And that I think that's a good one, to sit there and sort of say, of the past 5 years, what are some of the top moments? And, Rodon's no-hitter, I mean, honestly, it has to be towards the top of the list, right? Because it's such an exciting thing to have happen. And I don't think you're going to see too many people sitting there going, yeah, well, I remember being in the stands and, Sebi Zavala hit a nice line drive to left field. That was just one of my favorite moments. It just showed that he's got some moxie, that kid. But on the other hand, I guess some people might sit there and say Sebi's, multi-home run game out of nowhere. That was a pretty fun moment, too. So.
Yeah. There's always some interesting things that pop up out of nowhere. The Sebi Zavala moment is one of those where you're like, did he actually just do that type of thing? And those are the fun ones, too, when you look back, and especially during the rebuild. Just some random fun moments that, most of the fun things are going to come from 2021, but at the same time, there were some fun things along the way that, hey, looking back at it, may not have been the best White Sox baseball, but maybe for one day, that was a pretty fun game, so.
Well, yep, and I think, I'm looking forward to seeing how that turns out, so check out SoxOn35th.com for that article and more, and then, of course, you can always listen to Sox in the Basement at SoxOn35th.com or anywhere podcasts can be heard. Thank you for joining me today, Jordan, and I know we will look forward to having you back on again real soon.
Absolutely. Thanks for letting me fill in and, use some of those lawyer skills to get these CBA negotiations moving, like needle yourself in the door there and get things moving along for us, huh?
Yeah, that's just what they need. Let me break into the room and just tell you that not only am I a lawyer, but I'm a White Sox podcaster, so I have all the answers.
Sox in the basement. Sox in the basement. Sox in the basement.
Sox in the Basement. Heard everywhere podcasts can be found and always on soxinthebasement.com.